Precision Teaching Podcast.
It's about that time again.
Yes, it is. We are in August, and we are, on behalf of Doug Kosowitz and myself, we're very happy to have you all here. Well, Doug, we don't have an interview today, so that means that it's just you and I.
Oh no.
Yes.
I don't know if that's good, bad, or other.
Well, the way the logistics worked, we couldn't schedule the person we were supposed to have an interview, but we'll have an interview in August.
Mm-hmm.
So that means you and I are just going to talk about a few things, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Well, let's start off with our announcements. I can say now, and this is exciting, who our speakers are for the upcoming International Precision Teaching Conference held at Penn State. And one of our speakers, we have a theme this year for the conference, and the conference is Precision Teaching and Science, Candles in the Dark. And that actually is kind of a ripoff of Carl Sagan, who talked about science as being a candle in the dark. So piggybacking on science, we put precision teaching in there. And I think that's pretty important because precision teaching is based upon science. And people should be aware of the roots of science, and they should be aware that, hey, look, this thing that we do, precision teaching, is about science. So at any rate, that's where that comes from.
Okay.
Now, what I wanted to do was get some scientists, as many as I could, for the conference. And so the first speaker that we have, his name is Todd Sowers. And Todd Sowers he's not a precision teacher, he's a paleoclimatologist.
Oh,
and,
wow.
Yeah, he does some really incredible work with ice core samples. He'll leave a few times a year to go to Antarctica, and he's there collecting ice core samples, and he does lots of work with the climate, stuff that is beyond me, but he has some really interesting papers that are published in prestigious journals like Science, and he's going to talk to us about his work, which I thought it'll be nice to have a speaker a scientist that can speak to us and talk about the importance of data and talk about science and so on. And I thought that would be a very, very exciting person to have at our conference.
I think so. That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and the other person that we have,
Ooh,
which
two.
This is a precision teacher, and if I could have a drum roll, I would have the drum roll going right now. Thank you. And it is Owen White.
Wow.
Yes, Owen White will be a speaker, and he's going to be talking about precision teaching and science and all kinds of interesting things, and I'm just ecstatic that he is coming out to the conference. It's going to be great. And I've also had a chance to look at, since I'm running it, I've had a chance to look at the other people that are coming and the submissions and the talks, and it's just going to be such a good conference.
I think you're also a little biased because it's right in your backyard. So
that certainly is true. I can't argue with you. But just the people that are going to be here, there's some outstanding speakers, there's some great topics, and
definitely.
Yeah, there are some other surprises that I'm going to say this. Don't miss the chart share. That's all I have to say about that. And there will be some other little surprises coming on, happening at the conference. So I just hope that everyone who is listening to this podcast and is really either on the fence about coming to the conference, or is maybe thinking about it, that this helps to change their mind. You want to come to the conference because it's going to be great. What else can I say?
Hopefully, I'm sure the surprises will be surprising.
Yes, the surprises will be surprising.
Good.
And this conference is going to be operating on a greatness factor of 10.
Wow.
Yeah. Right.
We'll go for 11. We'll move it right on up to
The
11.
scale ends at 10, Doug.
Yes, but we want to move it up to 11.
Yeah, okay, so that's kind of like giving 110%, right?
Or, an obscure movie reference there. So,
Oh, was that a movie reference? It went right past me. What was the movie?
Spinal Tap.
Oh, right. Good one,
Yeah,
Doug.
no problem.
All right, you get a point there.
Okay.
You slipped a pop culture reference by me that I didn't pick up on.
You were in science mode at the time, so.
Yeah, I had my white lab coat on. Science mode.
Wow.
So there's our announcement. We have 2 excellent speakers, and of course we have a stellar cast that'll be joining us. And of course it's in one of the most beautiful campuses in the United States of America, which is Penn State University. And you'll be there. So what more could people ask for?
Very true.
All right, Doug, let's go on to our science news. And for the science news today, how could you talk about the science
I'm
news?
sorry, I couldn't stop laughing. Go ahead.
So the science news is called the mathematical model for surviving a zombie attack. Yes, people, this is legitimate science. And what's interesting about this article is that there are people out there, Doug, just like you and I, who love the Shamblers.
Yes.
Who love the dead folk.
I have to admit that I do enjoy a little zombie here and there. So.
Yeah, gotta get your zombie fix every now and then.
Exactly.
This article talks about there's a book on infectious diseases, and what these people have done is they said, you know what, let's create a mathematical model, and let's imagine there's a zombie outbreak, and what would happen. And as crazy as that sounds, really what they're doing here is they're doing this to make a point. And I always like when people make points with zombies. If you and I can figure out how to do this in our field, then
I'm still working on it. So
yeah, we're gonna have to come up with something.
Mm-hmm.
But with mathematical models, you can use mathematical models to predict all types of things, and that's one of the things that they talk about in the article. And to be honest, they're not the first people to do this. There have been other articles out there that talk about vampirism, and if one person bites another person, and what's going to happen, and so on. But this one, there is zombies are in the pop culture right now. There's a number of books out there on zombies. There's lots of movies that are coming out on zombies. And there's websites out there on zombies. And so here are some mathematicians who are like, hey, let's use this and make a point. Maybe let's get some people interested in math and the usefulness of being able to make different types of models, and there you have it.
Sounds cool to me.
Yeah, maybe we could come up with something and that has to do with acceleration in zombies.
Well, I'm sure you could put the infection rate on a standard acceleration chart and see it probably would be going up at a nice acceleration.
Yeah, they have a pretty interesting equation where they have S is susceptible, so those would be live people who can get bitten by a zombie. And then you have Z, which is the zombies, and then the R is the removed. So I'm guessing the removed would be the people who die or who aren't reanimated into zombies. And what's interesting about this is basically what they say is something that if a zombie outbreak happens, this is sort of like World War Z.
Mm-hmm.
The only way to eradicate this is to hit them hard, hit the zombie plague back, and you have to be systematic, and you have to be, we talk about impulsive eradication, which I love that term.
Yeah, that's a pretty quality term right there.
Yeah.
So it says here that in 3 days, based on that model, in a city of 500,000 people, zombies will outnumber susceptible people. That's
what's it
just,
like in Pittsburgh? How many people do you have around there?
I think greater Pittsburgh is 2.5 million, but downtown is probably 300 to 500,000. So in 3 days, it'd basically be overrun.
Overrun. Right. And then people like you would be driving up north or something.
Well, you can go through the zombie survival guide if you need help. So I'm not in the best spot according to that, being near a large urban center. So, but it's all in jest. Oh, by the way, our theme today, I forgot to mention, if you haven't guessed so far, is fun. We're having fun today.
That's right. That's always our theme. Sometimes it's just more in your face than others.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's interesting that they can take something in the pop culture like that, and really, it's it's almost related to thinking about teaching math to someone, and they really enjoy baseball, and well, you use math within baseball, and it makes it, I guess, more real for them, or someone pays attention a little bit more. So I don't see why math with zombies would be such a bad thing.
Yeah, the other thing that I like about this, I mean, you could use mathematical modeling, and this is what these people do. They use this for figuring out infectious disease models, and you could use this in politics. But that's the cool thing about science, is you could use it in many different ways, and that's what I like about this article is they have these people that are taking the serious science here, and rather than apply it to diseases or whatever, they're like, okay, let's apply it to zombies. So
it's like a Reese's peanut butter cup, right? The chocolate and the peanut butter cup go together. Well, science and zombies. Let's just put it together.
Yeah. I don't know that it's ever been described that way, but that's
I don't know. That's a pretty good one.
So check out the Surviving a Zombie Attack. It's in Wired Science, and if you want to go and read the actual article, then there's a link there to the book if you'd like to read it. So that's our science news for the day. Let's move on to our email question.
Question time.
Email question time. It says, I'm a new listener. I have been enjoying your interviews until you went off on learning styles. Do you really know the literature, or do you just not like learning styles? And this comes from Amy S. Well, Amy, thank you for your very interesting email question. What I'm going to guess, Amy, is that you are probably invested in learning styles. And that's okay, because oftentimes when you talk to people who are in the field, or you use information from the field, and it's something that you really believe is true, it's difficult when information comes out that doesn't support your belief. And I'd say this. My beliefs are formed by the literature, the scientific literature. And don't take my word for it. By all means, what I'm sharing to you is my read of the scientific literature. And what the scientific literature says about learning styles is that there's a lack of empirical evidence out there to support the fact that, and I'm going to stick with reading, that if you can find out what kids' learning styles are, I mean, that's speculative right there, because if you've ever seen these inventories and how they come up with a learning style. It's there are reviews out there that liken learning styles to fortune telling, in that the questionnaires are very vague and they're not very precise. But if you do find the student's supposed learning style, what happens is, as a teacher, when you try to match up that learning style to the preferred modality, there's no effects. And again, that's what you find when you review the research. So, again, it's not that I don't like learning styles or I'm against it, but I'm just relaying and sharing what the empirical evidence is, what the empirical evidence base is for learning styles.
So then, to answer that question, that is, you do know the literature around that topic. So it's
Yes.
not a personal attack against learning styles. I found similar, just using not just learning styles, but different beliefs that, or in methods for even, and we come back to education often. Both Rick and I are involved in education, and in classes and working with students who are coming into special education for the first time, and they hear of things like behavior analysis, and they've had very limited experience or have heard potentially some negative things, and then have heard a lot more about some of their techniques. And when I present newer techniques, again, they have those similar questions. They've asked me, do you just hate this? Do you not like this? And it comes back to what the data suggests, what the empirical evidence suggests. And it's not just limited to learning styles. It's the step back to what's the data out there? Because if the data came back and it was quality and it was valued and it was repeated and all the great aspects of science, then if it showed learning styles was the way to go, then we would change our tune.
That's right.
So it's not that we're sold on one thing and that's the end of the world. It's just up till this point, this is what we have.
Yeah, that's well stated. If you play by the rules of science, you really can never be wrong, because you're always going to be tentative and say, okay, this is what the current information tells us. And if that current information later turns out to be wrong, then you go with that, and it's wrong. You and I both have done research on fluency, behavioral fluency, and as much as we've done research on it, we've used it to help kids. It's something that's very powerful. But if there were evidence that came out that said, hey, this doesn't work, or this is not useful for kids, then by all means that would be the perspective that we have to adopt, that this isn't working, and we would look for something that's better out there. And that really is an important attitude to adopt, because it allows you to be dispassionate. And maybe that's not the right word. It allows you to be more objective.
That's a better word.
Is a better word, because scientists can be passionate. I mean, here's the bottom line: we're all humans, and science is a human activity, and humans make mistakes. Nobody is perfect, and I know I've done this. I've said things in the past where, boy, if I could take some of those things back, or things that I believed. I'm not saying a lot of what I've done has been like that, because most of the time I've been on, the side of science. But there have been things where, I said, I earlier in my career, where I was a little more passionate than I should have been, and some of the claims that I made weren't necessarily as strong as I was leading them to believe. But whatever, that's the past. But the point is I am passionate about things, and being human, I can be wrong about things too. But the way our game is played with science is it's public, so everybody knows what's going on. It's self-correcting. So if something is out there that, if someone, heck, there are people out there that plagiarize and cheat in science. And guess what happens when they do that? Eventually, they're found out. And there are retractions in journals, and people get on with life with that. But that's part of the neat thing about science, is that it is self-correcting. And people do replications, and we find out if certain theories hold water, and hopefully those theories eventually can, if they really have a lot of evidence behind them, they can become principles or laws. So, Amy, I would say this. I hope you keep listening to us, and we do have, we like having interviews and having lots of perspectives, and I hope one of the things you do pick up from our interviews is that we have lots of different scientists out there and people that are trying to help students do well. And if not students, just help people do well, because a lot of our interviews have been with people in the precision teaching field, and a lot of us are educators or psychologists, so we're looking at helping others. But, again, I do know the literature on learning styles, and it's not that I don't like the learning styles, but just what the evidence says is the evidence doesn't support learning styles, especially in things like helping kids to learn to read better.
And I think as a next step, maybe somehow a link or some availability. I know you have some of those right at your fingertips sometimes. So you might want to pass some of these things on, just to let them share and let people make their own judgments of the data and go from there. So
yeah, I'll put up something in the notes and maybe put a couple references up there to look at, and then you can go from there. That's the tricky thing, though, with education, is that you can find journals out there that for example, you can populate an editorial review board with people that believe in learning styles, and then they publish articles about learning styles, and then people say, oh, look, guess what? I have an article that supports learning styles. It's in a peer-reviewed journal. But what you have to do is you really have to be a good consumer of knowledge. And this isn't, I won't just pick on learning styles here. There are lots of different things that go on in education that are weak or been disproven in the past. And again, you get people who happen to believe in these things, and they populate these editorial boards, and they have these journals, and it looks like there's evidence. But what you'll find out is when you closely scrutinize those journals is oftentimes you'll find that a lot of these studies are descriptive, or they are, and by descriptive that could be like, okay, let's just go in and see what's happening. Or they might be survey type research, and they may ask teachers, do you like this theory X or whatever theory X is? And if 100 out of 150 say yes, then you write about that. But what we need to look at, what our gold standard is experimental evidence. And experimental evidence can be single case research, experimental evidence can be group statistics research, and whichever one you're doing, there are rules that make good single case research and rules that make good group statistics research. So, again, that doesn't mean we discount descriptive evidence, but it only goes so far. And certainly you can't make the same claims that you can with experimental evidence.
There's a hierarchy.
Yeah. So if you want to talk about generalizability of something, or generality of something, you really need to have experimental evidence. You can't make generalized statements based on what people feel about something. 100 people could say, hey, this is the greatest thing ever, but what happens is there may be some features about whatever that thing is you're doing that makes people like it, but that doesn't mean that it's good and that it's going to produce certain student outcomes.
Okay.
Have I gone overboard here? Have I sufficiently covered this question?
Yeah, it's a what you're trying to do is a very difficult thing in a few moments, and um, I think that maybe we can address it in a future maybe in another podcast. But it's there's many different steps, and there's got to have the right type of research, and then the research has to say something. And there's a lot of steps within that. So you were getting, I just wanted to. You were going this pretty far, so I just was trying to keep us back to the question at hand. So,
Hey, that's my passion. Getting the
hmm
better of me, Doug.
hey, I was right there with you because I just bit my tongue because I was going to add to it in the next step and give some references to if you want to learn about different types of research. So I said, wait a minute, maybe we can come back to our article review at some point. So,
Well, now could be that point. Amy, thank you for your question.
thank you very much.
Let's move on and let's talk about our article. And let's see. This article is a brief article written by Ogden Lindsley, and he wrote this in 1983, and it's called Say Reward, Relief, Punishment, or Penalty. Why don't you start off and tell me what you thought about this, Doug?
It is something, and these terms we're both, and we've mentioned this in prior podcasts. We're both behavior analysts, and this is something both of us have taught applied behavior analysis, and this really hits home. This comes into play in class because I try to get across to students the technical nature of behavior analysis. Has its own language, as with most sciences,
Yes,
and
that's right.
so I get across the try to get across the technical language, and then I always find myself coming back to what students can readily understand, and speaking plain English. What Og talks about here is the probably the four very common misnomers with the behavior analysis have caused so many problems over time in the mass media, in even with journals, and just being able to say, hey, these four words, they take all the mystery out of it. We don't speak a different language. This makes sense to people. This is how we talk, and so it hit home. I'm going to incorporate I've incorporated more common English for my students while they know what the more technical things are. But I'm going to just use these definitely in the fall or in the summer next year, and I think it'll make a lot more sense, and it'll become a lot more clear for them. So,
Yeah. This is, I mean, this is a pretty big issue in precision teaching, and this is what
hmm
Og was pushing. He has another paper that this might be good for us to review at a later time,
okay,
which is something like Speaking in Plain English. I can't remember the exact title, but he very much wants us to be able to communicate effectively with parents and with teachers. And it is true that we have a science, and of course that science, he references Skinner here, and of course Og was Skinner's student, and he's not saying that you should never have a technical jargon, but I think overall what he's saying is, hey, look, when you're working with teachers and parents, to communicate more effectively, if you bypass that technical jargon and use terms like reward, which would be positive reinforcement,
right,
and use relief, which would be a better term for negative reinforcement, punishment, which would still stand for punishment, and penalty, which would be like a type 2 punishment, so to speak, then that would be better that would help you communicate better with parents and with teachers. So I think after you read this article, when I think about myself, when I publish articles in journals, I'll use precision teaching terms, which is sort of a jargon of itself, but that's what I'm doing because that's part of the literature for precision teaching. But there are other times when I publish in behavioral journals, and when I publish there, I'll make sure that I use the correct technical terms. So this is a really interesting article, and I think it bears discussing because all of us, if we're in a situation, especially academics, where there are parents and teachers, and we can talk with them better, then this should be something we should definitely work hard at using in our vocabulary.
And what was really nice is at the end he comes back to not just reward, relief, punishment, or penalty, but he came back and defined it by the function on the behavior. So if you're doing something and the behavior accelerates and you're giving it, then that's a reward. And if you're taking it away and it accelerates, it's a relief. And if you're applying it and it's decelerating, it's a punishment. So it's defined still by its function, and then it's defined with regards to precision teaching. So it's still staying technically correct, even though you are using things that people can readily relate to.
Yeah, that's a good point. When we talk about acceleration, that's a descriptive measure.
Mm-hmm.
But when we get at understanding how the world's working with behavior, we're looking at the function of things. And those are some good rewards. Those are some good examples that he's giving in the back. So he's talking about if you spell words correctly or incorrectly. And he's talking about punishers and penalties in regards to words spelled incorrectly. And that helps us, again, positively. If we want to know why something happening, if we do something in the classroom, what effect or what function is that thing that we're doing having? And of course, the beauty of being a precision teacher is you have the best visual display that's out there for time series behavior, and you can precisely see what's happening. And you can measure something the day you do it. You can look at a frequency jump up or a frequency jump down, right? So you know exactly that from that one moment to the next of measurement, what effects that having. And then you can also look at the long-term effects of whatever it is you're doing in regards to acceleration. So yeah, that point that you make about function is a very important one, and this article that Og has written is just saying, let's use these plain English terms, reward, relief, punishment, or penalty, to better describe positive and negative reinforcement and type 1 and type 2 punishment.
Okay.
Well, what else is there to say about this article? Anything?
Not really. I think
it's a 2-pager.
Yeah, it's
on terminology.
Yeah, so that, I guess the last thing to say is still make sure, even if you use plain English, is to make sure you use correct plain English. That would be the last thing I'd say.
No, definitely. Yeah, plain English doesn't mean you can be sloppy with your terminology.
Right.
Even if you're using plain English.
All right.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have an interview this month, but we will next month. And keep those email questions coming. And on behalf of Doug and myself, thank you for joining us at the Precision Teaching Podcast.